He stood across the courtroom, calm, composed, and merciless. The boy I once taught to tell the truth was now defending a man I swore was a killer. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if I was fighting for justice or for my pride. I hadn't seen Ethan in 2 years. Not since the night I told him to leave my house, to come back when he had a spine. He did come back, just not the way I imagined. The day I stepped into that courtroom, as a witness, he was already there. Standing tall, in a dark gray suit, his voice steady, as he introduced himself, defense attorney for Mr. Ray Porter. Ray Porter, the man whose face had haunted me for months. The man I'd arrested with my own hands. The man I believed had murdered a girl named Lila Rowe in cold blood. I could still see her mother crying on the porch, clutching a photograph, while I promised, "We'll get him." I always kept my promises, until today. Ethan's eyes met mine for a second. Not the warm, curious eyes of the boy who used to sit on my lap while I told him bedtime stories about justice and duty. These eyes were sharp, deliberate, searching, like a surgeon about to cut. When the judge called my name, I walked to the stand with the weight of 25 years as a cop pressing down on my chest. Every step echoed with memories, sirens, cuffs, blood. I took the oath, raised my hand, and felt that strange tremor again. The one I'd been hiding with caffeine and silence. Detective Miller Ethan began, his voice polite but distant. "You led the investigation that resulted in my client's arrest, correct?" I nodded. Yeah. Based on multiple eyewitness statements and forensic evidence. He tilted his head slightly, evidence that has since been called into question. The room stiffened. Even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Ethan continued, flipping through his notes with that calm I used to admire, the same calm I'd mistaken for weakness when he was younger. "Tell me, detective, did you personally witness my client commit the crime?" I frowned. "No, but the circumstances..." "Did you find his fingerprints on the murder weapon?" "No. But any DNA evidence..." My voice cracked before I could stop it. "No." Ethan's tone softened, but it cut even deeper. "So all we have is your belief, Detective Miller. Your belief that Ray Porter is guilty." My chest burned. Belief. I saw the way he looked at her. I heard the neighbors' accounts. "Belief," Ethan repeated quietly, as if testing the word on his tongue. "You taught me once that justice must stand on evidence, not emotion. Did that change when you put on a badge?" The words hit harder than a bullet. The judge called for order, but I barely heard it. My mind was already somewhere else, in the backyard of our old house. Ethan, at 12 years old, asking me why I never cried at funerals. I'd told him a man can't serve justice if he lets his heart get in the way. He'd looked at me then with that same quiet sadness he wore now. As I stepped down from the stand, I caught a glimpse of the jury, uncertain, uneasy. For the first time in my career, I wasn't the man everyone trusted. I was just a father being dismantled by his own son. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun was harsh, unforgiving. I sat on the steps and lit a cigarette, my first in months. My hands shook, not from guilt, not yet, but from something worse out. Because somewhere, deep down, beneath the badge, beneath the pride, a voice I'd buried long ago began to whisper, "What if he's right?" And for the first time in 25 years, I didn't have an answer. The next day, Ethan came to find me, not as a lawyer, not as a son seeking forgiveness, but as a man who finally had the courage to question everything I ever believed in. He found me on the steps of the courthouse, just as I was finishing my cigarette. He didn't say a word at first, just stood there, hands in pockets. That same steady gaze that used to make me proud. Now, it only made me feel small. "Didn't think you'd still be here," he said finally. "I could say the same to you." I flicked the cigarette into the gutter. "Guess you're enjoying yourself in there, tearing down everything your old man ever stood for." He sighed quietly. "I'm not tearing anything down, Dad. I'm trying to stop something you started." That hit harder than I expected. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You arrested Ray Porter with nothing but instinct. You taught me to question everything. Remember, you said justice can't survive on emotion." I turned away. "You don't know what it's like out there. You read your books, you quote your laws, but you've never had to pull a trigger at 3 a.m. or knock on a mother's door with bad news. You think justice lives in your courtroom. It bleeds in the street, son." Ethan's jaw tightened. Then maybe it's time justice stopped bleeding. The words hung in the air like smoke. There was no anger in his voice, only conviction. And that scared me more than rage ever could. We stood in silence for a while, the kind of silence that grows teeth. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Mom would have wanted you to let this go." My throat went dry. "Don't bring her into this. She believed in second chances." Ethan continued softly. "You believed in punishment. Punishment keeps people safe, or it just keeps you angry." That was when I realized this wasn't just about Ray Porter. It was about us. About the years I'd spent teaching him to be strong, but never kind. About the nights he had come home from school with bruises, and I'd told him to fight back instead of talk. "You think I'm angry?" I said finally, my voice breaking. "You don't know what I've seen, Ethan." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I don't. But maybe that's the problem. You saw too much of the world's ugliness, and you stopped believing it could change." He looked at me, then really looked, and I saw something that shattered me: pity. I used to want to be you, he said quietly. Now I just want to understand you. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the echo of my own silence. That night I drove, without thinking, no destination, no plan, just miles of asphalt and regret. The radio played an old song I used to hum when Ethan was little. I remembered him in the passenger seat, 6 years old, legs too short to reach the floor, singing off-key. "Dad, what does justice mean?" he'd asked once. "It means doing what's right," I'd said. Even now the memory stung, because I'd forgotten what right even meant. The city blurred past neon lights, red taillights, fragments of lives I'd once sworn to protect. Somewhere, between the second and third cigarette, I found myself outside the precinct I'd retired from. The same cracked steps, the same flickering street lamp. Only now, I wasn't a cop. Just an old man haunted by his own certainty. I stared at the building for a long time, until my reflection in the glass door started to look like a stranger. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe justice had changed, and I hadn't. But the thought burned in my chest like acid. If I admitted he was right, then I'd have to admit I'd built my whole life on something wrong. And I wasn't sure I was brave enough for that. The next morning, I got a call from an old partner. Something new had surfaced in the case. Something that didn't fit. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not pride, but fear. That maybe my son wasn't the one making a mistake this time. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face across the courtroom, calm, resolute, untouchable. The same boy who once cried when he found a wounded bird in our backyard. He'd begged me to take it to a vet, and I'd told him it's nature's son. The strong survive. He didn't talk to me for 3 days after that. Now he was the one saving wounded things, and I was still breaking them. When my phone rang the next morning, I thought it was him. But it was Harris, my old partner. His voice was gruffer than I remembered. "John, you got a minute?" "Always. What's going on?" He hesitated. "You remember the Roe case, the one with Porter?" My stomach tightened. Hard to forget. "Yeah, well, you might want to sit down for this. The lab just found something. The DNA from the victim's fingernails? It's not Porter's." I froze. "What?" "Cross-check came in this morning. Different profile entirely." I rubbed my temple. Could it be contamination? Already ruled that out. The line went quiet. For a moment, all I could hear was my heartbeat, steady, heavy, accusing. John Harris said, lowering his voice, "You sure about your statement about what you saw that night?" "I'm sure," I said quickly. Too quickly. He sighed. "That's what I thought. Just be careful. The DA's going to reopen some things." When the call ended, I sat there staring at the wall, the weight of his words pressing down like a verdict. For 25 years, I'd built my identity on certainty, on the idea that if you looked hard enough, people would show you who they were. But what if I'd just seen what I wanted to see? I opened my old case folder, still dog-eared, still stained with the coffee I'd spilled the night I made the arrest. I flipped through photos of the scene. Blood on concrete, scattered belongings, a broken necklace. I remembered Porter's eyes when I cuffed him wide, terrified, pleading. He kept saying the same thing over and over. I didn't kill her. Please, you have to believe me. I hadn't. And now I wasn't sure if I could believe myself either. That afternoon I drove to the courthouse again. I didn't plan it. My hands just turned the wheel. Maybe part of me wanted to see Ethan to tell him he was right. Maybe the other part still wanted to prove he was wrong. He was standing by the steps, talking to his client. Porter looked thinner than I remembered, pale, hollow-eyed, the kind of man life had already beaten, long before any court could. When Ethan saw me, he excused himself and walked over. "Dad," he said, his tone cautious. "You okay?" I forced a laugh. "Do I look okay?" He smiled faintly. "You look like a man who just found out he might have been wrong." That stung, but I didn't deny it. "You've been busy digging, haven't you?" "It's my job." "And embarrassing your father in public, that part of the job too." He hesitated. "If the truth embarrasses you, maybe it's not the truth's fault." The line hit deep. I felt the old instinct rise, the need to shut him down to win the argument. But then I saw his hands trembling slightly as he held his briefcase. He wasn't my enemy. He was scared too. "Listen, Ethan," I said quietly. "You think you know what justice is, but you haven't seen what I've seen. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes you have to go with your gut." He met my eyes. "And sometimes, Dad, your gut just wants to protect your ego." The words hung between us like a knife. Before I could respond, a voice called out. Behind him, a woman's voice. "Mr. Miller, the judge is ready for you." He turned to go, then stopped. "You always told me to do what's right, even if it made people hate me. I'm just doing that now." I watched him walk away, his back straight, his steps measured the same way I used to walk when I still believed I was invincible. For the first time, I saw it clearly. My son wasn't fighting against me. He was fighting for something I had lost faith in. And somehow that realization hurt more than anything else. That night I reopened every file, every report, every photograph. Somewhere in that mess of paper and pain was a truth I'd buried years ago. And maybe, just maybe, my son was about to dig it up. The files spread across my kitchen table like a crime scene of their own. Photographs, statements, timelines, each one a piece of a puzzle I'd once sworn I'd already solved. But now, under the weak light of a single bulb, everything looked different. The ink had faded. The faces seemed older, and every note I'd written in the margins felt like a confession. I poured myself a cup of coffee, though what I needed was sleep. My hands trembled as I turned the page to the autopsy report. Lila Rowe, 22, waitress, no known enemies, no signs of struggle apart from bruises on her wrists. Time of death, 11:46 p.m., caused blunt force trauma. I'd written that line myself, in all caps, like it was gospel. And then tucked between the pages, I found something I didn't remember. A supplemental statement, unsigned, barely legible. A neighbor had seen someone else leaving the alley that night. Not Porter. Someone taller. Wearing a police jacket. I froze. Back then, I hadn't followed up. The report was logged after the arrest, and by then, I was already convinced. I'd dismissed it as unreliable, probably a drunk witness. But now, reading it again, I realized something worse. It wasn't just negligence. It was pride. I picked up my phone and called Harris. That neighbor. The one who saw someone else leaving the alley. You remember her? Vaguely, he said. Older lady. Said she saw a guy in uniform. Why? I think we missed something. He was silent for a long time. John, that was years ago. I know. You retired for a reason. Let the DA handle it. I can't. He sighed. You never could. When the call ended, I sat there staring at the badge that still hung by my kitchen wall. It wasn't pride anymore. It was a relic, a reminder of a man who once thought the world could be sorted into right and wrong, guilty and innocent. But life wasn't a courtroom. It was a confession with no end. The next morning, I went back to the alley. It was smaller than I remembered, narrower, darker. The graffiti had changed, but the smell of rain and rust was the same. I walked past the dumpster where they'd found her purse, the cracked wall where I'd once marked blood spatter. For a moment, I could almost see her there again, lying in the cold, her hair-soaked eyes open to the sky. I remembered telling her mother that her death wouldn't be in vain. Now I wasn't sure I'd kept that promise. Footsteps behind me broke the silence. Didn't think I'd find you here, Ethan said. I didn't turn. You shouldn't be here. I could say the same. He stepped closer. Dad, I know about the neighbor's statement. I exhaled slowly. You've been digging. I had to. You built your case on assumptions. I'm trying to find what you didn't. I turned then, meeting his gaze. There was no anger in it this time, only exhaustion. You think you're the hero in this story, don't you? He shook his head. No, I just don't want you to be the villain. The words landed like a punch I didn't see coming. For years, I'd taught him that the world needed men who stood for the truth. I just never imagined I'd become the obstacle standing in its way. He looked around the alley, then back at me. Dad, what if the person in that jacket wasn't Porter? What if it was someone from your precinct? My stomach turned. Watch what you're implying. I'm not implying. I am asking. I took a step toward him. You have no idea what happens out here. You think everything fits in your perfect little courtroom. He cut me off, voice steady. I don't need it to fit. I just need it to be true. Silence stretched between us, heavy and sharp. The kind that ends arguments by cutting through them. I looked around one last time, the walls, the shadows, the ghosts. Then I said quietly, if you're right, son, then everything I ever believed in dies here tonight." He nodded. "Then maybe it's time it did." Neither of us spoke after that. The rain started to fall, washing the alley clean, or maybe just trying to. And as I watched my son walk away, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Fear not of losing the case, but of losing myself in the truth he was about to find. The rain hadn't stopped since that morning. It came down in quiet sheets, soft enough to make the city seem like it was holding its breath. I stayed in the car outside the precinct, watching the drops slide across the windshield, each one distorting the reflection of a man I barely recognized. Inside, I could see the faint glow of the hallway where I'd once walked with purpose. Every night used to end here, the smell of old coffee, the hum of fluorescent lights, the small jokes exchanged between tired men who believed they were doing something good. Back then, I thought justice was something you earned by surviving long enough to deserve it. Now it felt like something I'd lost the right to speak about. I walked in anyway. The officer at the desk recognized me, gave a small nod. "Detective Miller." "Been a while?" "Yeah," I said. "Long while." The walls still had the same peeling paint, the same bulletin board covered in old wanted posters. But there was a weight in the air, something heavier than time. I found Harris in the back office staring at a computer screen filled with reports. He didn't look surprised to see me. "You still chasing ghosts? Maybe just my own." He leaned back, sighing. "You shouldn't be here, John. People start asking questions when old cases get dug up. Maybe they should." I dropped the neighbor's statement on his desk. "You remember this?" He scanned it, frowning. "Yeah. Witness saw a cop jacket, thought it was a hallucination. Except it wasn't." He looked up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone might have been there that night, someone wearing a uniform, and if the DNA isn't Porter's," he finished the sentence for me, "then it's someone from inside." Neither of us spoke for a while. The rain on the window filled the silence. Harris finally muttered, "You realize what you're implying, right? That we locked up the wrong man. That one of our own could have done it." I nodded slowly. "I know. And you think you can fix that now?" "I have to try." He rubbed his face. "John, you're retired. You don't owe the department anything." "I'm not doing it for the department." He stared at me for a long time, then slid a file toward me. This was sealed after the case. Internal memo. You didn't hear it from me. I opened it carefully. Inside were photos of a boot print found at the scene, different from Porter's shoes. The print matched a model issued to officers that same year. My chest tightened. "Jesus," I whispered. Harris exhaled. "It's thin, but it's something." "I'll take it." As I turned to leave, he said quietly, "Be careful, John. Sometimes the truth gets you killed faster than a bullet." Outside, the rain had eased into a mist. I stood under the streetlight, holding the file close, my reflection shimmering in the puddle below. For the first time, I didn't feel like a cop. I felt like a suspect in my own life. That night, Ethan came to my apartment unannounced. His clothes were soaked, his face pale. He didn't knock, just stood in the doorway, holding a folder of his own. I found something he said. I motioned for him to come in. He dropped the folder on my table right next to mine. Inside were transcripts of old disciplinary reports. Officers investigated for misconduct. One name stood out. Officer Mark Delaney, my old partner before Harris, suspended once for tampering with evidence, quietly reinstated 2 months before Lila Rose's death. Ethan looked at me. You didn't know. I shook my head. No, they kept that off my desk. He was with you that night, wasn't he? I swallowed hard. He was supposed to stay in the car. Ethan's voice trembled. Dad, if he was there. I know what it means. The room went still. For a moment, neither of us were cop and lawyer anymore. Just father and son, caught in the same storm. Ethan spoke first. If we go public with this, it could destroy everything. The department, your reputation. Maybe that's the price, I said. He shook his head. No, it's not just about you. You could ruin lives. I met his gaze. And what about the one already ruined? He didn't answer, just sat down staring at the floor. After a while, he said quietly, You always told me to do the right thing, no matter who it hurts. I never realized that included you. I looked at him, then truly looked. He wasn't the boy who needed my guidance anymore. He was the man I had been too afraid to become. The clock ticked in the silence, each second heavier than the last. Somewhere between us, the truth waited, patient, merciless, inevitable. And for the first time, I was ready to face it. I hadn't seen Mark Delaney in almost 15 years. Back then, he was everything a young cop wanted to be: confident, loyal, quick to draw, but quicker to laugh. We'd saved each other's lives more than once. Or at least that's what I used to tell myself. Now, standing in front of his small house on the edge of town, I wasn't sure which version of him I was about to meet. The porch light flickered weakly as I knocked. For a long moment, nothing. Then the door opened, and there he was, older, heavier eyes that didn't shine anymore. John, he said flatly, didn't expect to see you here. Didn't expect to come, I replied. He gestured for me to enter. The living room smelled like Giti and whiskey. Old case photos and medals hung crooked on the wall. There was a time when that kind of room would have made me proud. Now, it just made me tired. He poured 2 drinks without asking. So what's this about reminiscing? I set the folder on the table between us. You remember Lila Rowe? The glass froze halfway to his mouth. That's a name I haven't heard in years. You were with me that night.
I was.
And you stayed in the car. The car. He didn't answer. Just took a long sip. I leaned forward. Mark, the lab found new DNA. It's not Porter's. There's a witness who saw someone in uniform leaving the alley. He chuckled dryly. You came all this way for a ghost story. You were there. I told you I stayed in the car. Then why does the boot print at the scene match the model issued to us that year? His eyes darkened. You still playing Detective John? I'm trying to figure out if I put an innocent man in prison. Don't. He slammed the glass down. You start digging now, you'll drown both of us. I can live with that. He shook his head. No, you can't. You were the one who wanted that case closed. You needed a win, remember, Porter? Fit the picture. You said so yourself. That doesn't make him guilty. It made him convenient, he said coldly. I stood up, fists clenched. Did you kill her? He laughed, bitter and low. You really think I'd answer that here? Then tell me what happened. He looked away, jaw tightening. We were supposed to question her boyfriend that night. You got the call about a body in the alley. I went to check it out first. She was already gone when I found her. Why didn't you call it in? Because you'd already decided who did it. I stared at him. You're saying you covered it up for me. He met my eyes, then tired, defiant. I'm saying we both wanted it over. You think I liked it? Watching you fall apart after your wife died, chasing monsters just to feel alive again. You needed someone to blame. So I gave you someone. The room spun. You falsified evidence. I cleaned up a mess. No, I said quietly. You made one. He leaned back, smirking. And what are you gonna do now? John, turn me in. You think the department's gonna thank you for dragging this out? You think your son will? At the mention of Ethan, something inside me cracked. This isn't about thanks. It's about the truth. He laughed again. The truth. That's rich coming from you. You built your whole damn career on pretending it was simple. I took a step toward him. If you had nothing to hide, you wouldn't be shaking right now. He slammed his hand against the table, sending the glass tumbling. You don't know what it's like living with what we've done. I didn't flinch. You're right. I don't. Because I stopped living the day we let an innocent man rot in prison. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain against the window. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, it wasn't supposed to go this far. What wasn't? But he didn't answer. He just stared at the folder on the table, the one with her name written in black ink. And I knew I wasn't getting anything more tonight. As I turned to leave, he said one last thing. You start this, you'd better finish it. Because once the truth comes out, it's not just me it'll bury. Outside, the storm had turned violent. I stood on the porch, lightning flashing behind me, the file clutched in my hand. I'd come here looking for answers. What I found instead was the beginning of something I wasn't sure I could stop. When I got back to the car, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Dad, don't talk to anyone else until you call me. I found something. And in that moment, I realized the storm wasn't outside anymore. It was in us. Ethan's message kept replaying in my head as I drove through the storm. Don't talk to anyone else until you call me. His voice, even through text, carried that quiet urgency he'd had since he was a boy. The tone he used when he found something fragile and didn't want to break it by speaking too loud. When I reached his office, the lights were still on. He was sitting behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, hair damp from the rain. The folder in front of him looked heavier than any I'd ever held. He didn't look up when I entered. "I went through Delaney's old records," he said. "You won't like what I found." I closed the door behind me. "Try me." He slid a photograph across the table, a crime scene photo I'd seen 100 times. Only this time, something was different. The time stamp in the corner was 15 minutes earlier than the one in my official report. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Internal archives." The file was misdated on purpose. Whoever handled evidence that night changed the timeline. "Delaney," I said under my breath. "There's more." Ethan continued. "His patrol car logs show he left the station 40 minutes before the call came in. That means he was already near the scene before anyone reported the body." My pulse quickened. "That's not possible. I gave the order myself." He cut me off. "Dad, I checked. Your call record was logged 9 minutes after his car went off the radar. Someone covered it." I took a slow breath, my mind turning over the pieces like glass shards. He said she was already dead when he found her. Ethan looked at me, steady, patient. What if he wasn't telling the truth? The air between us grew heavy. I felt it pressing against my chest, against everything I'd ever believed about loyalty, about the brotherhood we wore like armor. "He was your partner," Ethan said gently. "I get that. But that doesn't mean he was innocent." I shook my head. "You don't understand. We went through hell together. If I'd thought for a second..." He interrupted again, softer this time. "You didn't think, Dad. You believed. There's a difference." I sat down across from him. The rain on the window had slowed to a drizzle, but inside, everything felt like it was still flooding. "Do you know what happens if you're right?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Then Porter walks free, and you'll have to testify against your old partner. And the department." He hesitated. "They'll do what they always do. Bury the truth as deep as they can." I stared at the folder. "And you're okay with that?" "No," he said, "but I'm not okay with letting an innocent man rot because 2 cops made a mistake." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were mine. I'd said the same thing to a rookie once years ago, after a botched raid. "Never lie to yourself," I'd told him. "That's how good men become ghosts." Now I understood what that really meant. I stood pacing the room. If we go to the DA, they'll come after both of us. They'll say I pushed for the arrest. They'll spin it however they need to. Ethan looked up. "Then let them. I'll stand beside you." I stopped walking. "You'd risk your career for this." "For the truth," he said simply. "For you." The silence after that felt sacred. The kind that doesn't need filling. I realized then that my son wasn't trying to prove me wrong. He was trying to pull me out of the wreckage I'd built around myself. Finally, I nodded. "We do it your way." He exhaled a mix of relief and fear. "Then we start tomorrow. I'll file a motion to reopen the case." I started for the door, then turned to back. "Ethan, whatever happens next, don't let this change who you are." He smiled faintly. I won't. That's your job. I left before he could see the look on my face, the one that said I wasn't sure I could live up to the man he already thought I was. Outside, the storm had passed. The streets were quiet, glistening under streetlights. But deep down, I knew the real storm was only beginning. Because when you dig for the truth, you don't always find light. Sometimes you find yourself. The courtroom looked smaller this time. Maybe because I wasn't there as a witness or a detective. I was there as a man standing on the edge of his own truth. Reporters crowded the back rows, their whispers fluttering like moths against the silence. Ethan sat beside the defense table, calm as ever, papers neatly stacked, eyes steady. Across the aisle, Mark Delaney avoided my gaze. He looked older under the fluorescent lights, the kind of old that comes from secrets, not years. The judge entered. Everyone rose. When we sat again, I could feel every breath in the room, waiting for the first crack to appear. Ethan stood. Your Honor, the defense moves to present new evidence regarding the conviction of Ray Porter. The judge nodded, flipping through his notes. Proceed, Mr. Miller. Ethan approached the center of the courtroom. His voice was steady, almost too calm. This evidence suggests that the original investigation contained discrepancies. We have discovered altered timestamps, suppressed witness testimony, and a potential conflict of interest involving a member of law enforcement present at the scene. The words dropped like stones into water. Ripples of murmurs filled the air. Delaney's lawyer objected something about procedure, but the judge let Ethan continue. He turned toward me. Detective John Miller, would you please take the stand? I hadn't expected it to feel like this. The walk from the bench to the witness chair felt longer than any patrol I'd ever done. When I took my seat, Ethan looked at me the way he used to look at sunsets, quietly, as if something was ending. Detective Miller, he began, you were lead investigator in the Roe case, correct?
Yes.
You arrested Ray Porter.
I did.
He took a step closer. And now that you've reviewed the evidence, do you still believe he was guilty? The room held its breath. Even the judge's pen stopped moving. I swallowed hard. No, I don't. Ethan's face didn't change, but his eyes did. I saw pride, sadness, and something like forgiveness all at once. He nodded. Can you explain why? I leaned toward the microphone, my voice quieter than I expected. Because I let what I wanted to be true blind me to what was. I ignored a witness statement. I trusted my instincts instead of the evidence. And I believed in a man I shouldn't have. A murmur ran through the room. Delaney shifted in his seat, jaw tight. Ethan stepped aside. That man was it, your partner, Mark Delaney. Delaney's attorney shot up. Objection. Sustained, the judge said. Counselor, rephrase. Ethan nodded. Detective Miller, did anyone else from your department have access to the crime scene before it was secured? I met Delaney's eyes for the first time. Yes.
Who?
Mark Delaney. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. Delaney didn't move, didn't blink. But I saw it, the flicker, the fracture. Ethan placed a photo on the screen, the boot print enlarged and labeled. This print was matched to boots issued to officers that year. Detective Miller, can you confirm that you and your partner were the only officers wearing that model? I nodded. We were. And were Mr. Delaney's boots ever submitted for testing? I closed my eyes for a moment. No, they weren't. Ethan looked at the judge. Your Honor, we request an order to reopen the investigation with a full forensic review. The judge leaned back, exhaling. Granted. Delaney stood suddenly. You're destroying lives with this circus. Ethan turned to him, calm and unflinching. No, sir. We're trying to save one. Security moved closer, and the judge called for order. But my eyes stayed on Delaney. For a moment, our past flashed between us, the long nights on patrol, the laughter after a close call, the unspoken brotherhood. And then, like a light going out, it was gone. When the gavel finally struck, the sound echoed through me like a heartbeat I hadn't felt in years. Ethan gathered his papers. As the crowd began to file out, he looked at me and said quietly, You did the right thing. I shook my head. No, you did. I just stopped doing the wrong one. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's all justice really is. As I walked out of the courtroom, the air felt lighter, though I knew the storm was far from over. The truth was out, but so were the ghosts that came with it. And somewhere deep down I could feel it, beginning that quiet collapse of the man I'd been and the slow, painful birth of the one I might still become. The courthouse emptied long before I could bring myself to leave. The rain had stopped, but the sky stayed the same, dull gray, the kind that made the whole city feel like an unfinished sentence. I sat on the bench outside the same one I'd used the day Ethan first stood across from me. Back then, I'd thought he was my enemy. Now I knew better. He joined me quietly, holding 2 coffees. He handed me one still warm. You looked like you could use it. Thanks, I said, my voice rough. Feels strange, being on this side of the truth. He gave a faint smile. Truth doesn't have sides, Dad, just consequences. I nodded, staring out at the wet pavement. You always were better at seeing that than me. He didn't answer right away. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of cars passing the city, slowly returning to its rhythm, indifferent to what had just happened inside those walls. Finally, Ethan said, They'll probably indict Delaney. I sipped the coffee, though it tasted like guilt. They should. You know it won't stop there. The department is going to reopen everything you touched. Every case, every conviction. I know. He looked at me. You could lose everything you built. I met his gaze. Maybe that's the point. The words surprised me as they left my mouth. But they felt right, like an old truth, finally remembered. Ethan leaned back, eyes softening. You don't have to carry all of it, you know. I do, I said quietly, because I carried the badge, and I let it mean more than the people it was supposed to protect. He nodded slowly, understanding more than I expected. Mom used to say, "You carried the world on your back." She just never realized it was the wrong world. That made me smile barely. She was always better at seeing through me. "She loved you," Ethan said simply. "I know," I whispered. "I just wish I'd learned how to love her back the way she deserved, with softness, not control." For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to defend, no argument left to win. Just two men sitting in the aftermath of something they couldn't fix, but could finally name. Ethan broke the silence. "Delaney's lawyer called me. He's talking." My stomach tightened. What did he say? He admitted to falsifying reports, hiding the weapon. Said he did it to protect you, that you were falling apart after Mom died, and he thought closing the case would keep you together. I closed my eyes. "God, he says you didn't know," Ethan added, "that it was his decision." I shook my head. "Doesn't matter. I should have seen it." I wanted to believe too much. Ethan hesitated. "He's going to ask for a deal, cooperation in exchange for leniency." "Let him have it," I said. "He's not the only one who needs redemption." Ethan studied me for a long moment. "You really mean that?" "I do. Because if the truth costs me my name, my reputation, my legacy, then maybe that's finally justice." He didn't argue, just nodded, eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy. Faith. Not in the law, but in people. He stood finishing his coffee. "You know, I spent most of my life trying not to become you." I looked up at him. "How's that working out?" He smiled. "Turns out I'm just a better version of what you were trying to be." I laughed softly. "Yeah, you are." He reached out and put a hand on my shoulder. "Come home, Dad, just for tonight. We don't have to talk about the case. Just be there." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something in me knew I wasn't done yet. "Go ahead, son. I'll catch up later." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, don't stay out too long." When he walked away, I sat there watching him disappear into the mist. My son, the man I couldn't be, and the man I finally understood. The streetlight above flickered on, washing everything in pale gold. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old badge. The metal was cold against my palm. I stared at it for a long time, then set it down on the bench beside me. For years that badge had been my anchor. Now it felt like a chain. I stood leaving it there under the rain and walked into the quiet evening. Behind me, thunder rolled far in the distance. Ahead, the city lights blurred into something almost peaceful. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. Morning came quietly. No sirens. No headlines screaming my name. Just the soft hum of a world that didn't care who was guilty or right anymore. I watched the sunlight creep across my living room floor, touching the half-packed boxes I'd ignored for weeks. Maybe I'd move, maybe not. It didn't matter. The house had become a museum of the man I used to be. A knock on the door broke the silence. I already knew who it was. Ethan stepped inside. Still in his suit, his tie loosened, eyes tired but calm. "They cleared Porter," he said. "Charges dropped this morning." I nodded. "Good. He's free, Dad. After 9 years. 9 years." The words landed like the echo of a gunshot that had taken almost a decade to reach me. I sat down, letting the weight of it sink in. Ethan walked to the window, looking out at the street. Delaney confessed, said he acted alone, claimed you didn't know. "I didn't," I said quietly. "But I wanted to." He turned. "What do you mean?" "I wanted the case to be simple. A villain to punish. A story I could believe in." I stared at my hands. It's easier to live with a lie than to live without a purpose. Ethan didn't speak for a while. He just pulled up a chair across from me. "So what now?" I smiled faintly. "Now I tell the truth. To the people who trusted me. To the ones I hurt. Maybe even to myself." He nodded. "They'll come after you. The department. The press." "I know. And you're ready for that." "I'm ready to stop hiding." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't have to do it alone." "I'm not." I looked at him. "You're the proof. I didn't fail completely." He smiled, small and real. "You didn't fail at all, Dad. You just took the long way to learn what you were teaching me." That made me laugh softly. "You always were a better student than I deserved." For a moment, we just sat there. Two men bound not by blood alone, but by the truth they had finally stopped running from. Then Ethan said, "Porter asked about you. He doesn't hate you, you know. Said he wants to meet." I looked down, unsure whether I had the right. Maybe someday, when I can look him in the eye without the badge between us. Ethan stood buttoning his jacket. "You'll know when that day comes." As he headed for the door, I said, "Ethan." He turned. "I'm proud of you. Not because you proved me wrong, because you didn't let anger turn you into me." He gave a quiet smile. "You raised me better than that." And then he was gone. I sat there a while longer, listening to the faint sounds of the city laughter traffic, a siren far away. Life going on, indifferent, unstoppable. On the table lay my badge, still wet from the night before. The light caught it just right. The engraving, half faded, but still readable, "Serve and Protect." I picked it up, turned it in my palm, and whispered to the empty room, "Maybe it's time I start doing both." I opened the door and stepped outside. The air smelled clean after the storm. Across the street, a father walked with his little boy, holding his hand as they crossed. For a moment, I saw myself the man I once was, the boy I nearly lost, the truth that had finally set us both free. I didn't need forgiveness. What I needed was peace. And in that small, quiet morning, I found it not in the courtroom, not in the past, but in the simple act of walking forward. Because justice isn't about punishment. It's about the courage to begin again,